The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, almost rehearsed. Not the comfortable quiet of a family home, where silence came and went naturally, but the kind that settled in after years of being carefully maintained. Every room in Elijah Warren's lakefront residence carried that stillness. Polished floors that never creaked. Walls that held no echoes of arguments or laughter. Windows that framed the gray stretch of Lake Washington like expensive artwork, untouched by fingerprints. Elijah liked it that way. Silence didn't demand anything from him. At 46, Elijah Warren was one of the most private billionaires in the Pacific Northwest. He had built his fortune early, sold his tech company before burnout took what it always took from founders, and invested with a patience that bordered on indifference. He didn't chase attention. Attention chased him anyway until he learned how to disappear from it. Most mornings followed the same pattern. Wake before sunrise. Black coffee, no sugar. Emails answered in order of importance, not urgency. Breakfast he barely tasted. A schedule so predictable that even time itself seemed to move slower inside his home. That morning was no different. Elijah sat at the long dining table, laptop open, glasses perched low on his nose. Outside, the lake was flat and metallic under a low sky. Inside, the only sound was the faint hum of the heating system, and, somewhere upstairs, the soft mechanical growl of a vacuum cleaner. He barely noticed it anymore. The woman who cleaned his house arrived 3 times a week, always at 7 sharp. She worked quietly, efficiently, without small talk or unnecessary movement. Elijah had approved her background check years ago, signed the paperwork, and promptly forgotten everything else. He knew her first name was Renee. That was all. She moved through his home like a shadow that tidied after itself. Coffee mugs returned to their places. Books aligned just so. His shirts folded the same way every time, sleeves tucked inward, as if she'd memorized his habits without ever asking about them. Elijah appreciated that. Predictability. No friction. He scrolled through financial projections, barely absorbing the numbers. Another board call was scheduled in under an hour. Another discussion about growth curves and long-term positioning. Important technically. Empty emotionally. Then something changed. The vacuum stopped. Elijah's eyes lifted from the screen without conscious thought. It took him a second to realize why the absence felt so loud. The vacuum never stopped. He listened. Seconds passed. The house held its breath. Then came a sound that didn't belong. A knock. Not at the front door. Not sharp or demanding. A soft, measured knock, coming from inside the house. Elijah frowned. No one knocked inside his home. Yes, he called, his voice echoing faintly in the dining room. Footsteps approached. Careful. Controlled. Renee appeared in the doorway. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, shoulders straight but tense. Her uniform was neat as always, dark blue against her brown skin, hair pulled back cleanly. But something about her face was different today. Tighter. Drawn. She looked tired. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Warren," she said. Her voice was calm but not casual. It carried weight. Elijah closed his laptop halfway, a reflex born from years of negotiations. "Is there a problem?" She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "No," she said. "I mean, yes, maybe. I wanted to ask you something." Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying her more closely now. He realized with a quiet surprise that this was the first real conversation they'd ever had. "All right," he said. "Go ahead." Renee inhaled slowly as if steadying herself. "I know this is unusual," she began. "And if the answer is no, I understand completely." Elijah didn't interrupt. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I wanted to ask if I could borrow some money." The words settled into the room, soft but heavy. Elijah blinked once. "Borrow?" he repeated. "Yes," she said. "A loan." He felt his shoulders tense instinctively. This was not something he allowed. Not with employees. It complicated things. Changed dynamics. Created expectations he didn't want to manage. "For what purpose?" he asked. Renee swallowed. "My mother is sick." The sentence was simple. No dramatics. No emotional appeal layered on top. Elijah studied her face, looking for signs of exaggeration or desperation. He found neither, only restraint. "How much are you asking for?" he said. She hesitated again. $20,000. The number meant almost nothing to him. He had spent more on a weekend retreat he barely remembered. And yet, something about the way she said it, carefully, respectfully, made it feel enormous. Elijah folded his hands together. "And why?" he asked slowly. "Are you asking me?" Renee's fingers tightened. "Because I work for you," she said. "And because I don't have anyone else to ask." The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Elijah glanced at the clock on the wall. He should have ended the conversation right there. Given a polite refusal. Suggested resources. Moved on. Instead, he heard himself say, "Sit down." Renee looked startled. "Please," he added, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Tell me what's going on." She sat, perching on the edge like someone ready to stand at the first sign of rejection. As she opened her mouth to speak, Elijah had no idea that this moment, this small interruption in his routine, was about to reach decades into his past. And somewhere deep inside him, something had already begun to shift. Before we go any further, if you're settling in with this story and want to hear how this quiet moment turns into something much bigger, make sure you're subscribed. Some stories don't announce when they're about to change everything. Renee took another breath. "There's more," she said softly. And that was when Elijah realized this wasn't just about money at all. Renee learned early how to be unnoticed. It wasn't a skill she was proud of, but it was one that paid the bills. In houses like this, large, immaculate, owned by people who valued order more than connection, being invisible meant keeping your job. It meant not asking questions. Not leaving traces of yourself behind. It meant doing your work so well that no one ever had to think about you. She arrived at Elijah Warren's house every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 7 in the morning. Not 7:02. Not 6:58. Exactly 7. She parked her aging sedan down the street, never in the driveway, and walked the rest of the way with her bag slung over her shoulder. The first time she'd seen the house, she'd almost turned around. It wasn't the size that intimidated her. She'd cleaned big houses before. It was the way the place seemed sealed off from the world. Glass, stone, steel. No children's bikes on the lawn. No wind chimes. No sign that anyone lived there, only that someone owned it. Inside, everything had a place. And everything stayed there. Renee learned the rhythm of the house quickly. Which floorboard creaked near the study. Which cabinet stuck unless you lifted it just right. How Mr. Warren liked his shirts folded, even though he'd never told her. She noticed small things because that was how she survived, by paying attention. Elijah Warren barely spoke to her. A nod in passing. A short thank you once in a while. She appreciated that more than forced friendliness. Politeness without curiosity felt safer. And yet, after 4 years, she knew his routines better than he probably realized. She knew he drank black coffee and let it go cold. That he worked at the dining table instead of the office most mornings. That he frowned slightly when reading emails, not in anger but in concentration. That he rarely left the house before 10. She also knew what he didn't see. That every time she wiped the long dining table, she imagined her mother sitting at one like it once, years ago, laughing with co-workers after a double shift. That every time she vacuumed the upstairs landing, she felt the dull ache in her own lower back and wondered if she'd end up the same way, body worn down before she ever got a chance to rest. Renee didn't plan to stay in house cleaning forever. No one ever did. But plans had a way of shrinking when life got complicated. Her phone vibrated in her pocket as she worked that morning. She ignored it at first. Personal calls during work hours weren't allowed. But when it vibrated again, then a third time, her stomach tightened. She finished the room she was in, unplugged the vacuum, and stepped into the bathroom to check. It was the hospital. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, before answering. "Yes," she whispered. The nurse's voice was calm, professional. Too calm. Renee leaned against the sink, gripping the edge until her knuckles whitened. When the call ended, she stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, forcing herself not to cry. Crying didn't solve anything. Crying wasted time. Her mother's test results were back. The numbers weren't good. The doctor wanted to move faster than expected. Faster meant money. Renee splashed water on her face, checked her reflection. She looked composed. She always did. Years of practice had taught her how to hold herself together long enough to get through the day. But as she returned to her work, her thoughts kept drifting. She thought about the stack of bills on her kitchen table. The insurance letters filled with words that sounded helpful but meant very little. The savings account she drained months ago just to keep things steady. She thought about how she'd promised her mother she'd figure it out. And she thought about the man sitting downstairs, typing calmly on his laptop, unaware that her entire world felt like it was collapsing inward. Renee didn't want to ask him. The idea made her chest tighten. Borrowing money from an employer wasn't just uncomfortable, it was risky. It changed how people looked at you, how they treated you. But she had already run out of better options. When she turned off the vacuum upstairs, her hands were shaking. She stood there, staring at the wall, listening to her own breathing. She could still walk away. Finish her shift. Go home. Pretend she hadn't considered it. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and headed downstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the dining room doorway and saw Elijah Warren seated at the table, absorbed in his screen, she almost turned back. Almost. She knocked. Softly. Carefully. And as she waited for him to answer, Renee knew that once she spoke, there would be no going back. The knock echoed more loudly than Renee expected. Not because it was forceful, but because the house wasn't used to interruption. The sound seemed to travel down the hallway, bounce off the high ceilings, and settle into the quiet like a dropped glass that hadn't shattered yet, but might. Yes. Elijah's voice carried from the dining room. Renee stepped forward before she could second-guess herself. Once she crossed that threshold, she knew she wouldn't be able to pretend this moment hadn't been building for weeks. She stood in the doorway, careful not to step fully into the room. It felt important, somehow, to leave herself an escape. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Warren," she said. He looked up from his laptop, mildly surprised. His expression wasn't unkind, but it was guarded. He was a man accustomed to controlling the terms of every interaction. "That's all right," he said. "Is something wrong?" Renee felt the question land heavier than he intended. Was something wrong? As if wrong were a temporary inconvenience instead of a slow-burning emergency. She clasped her hands tighter, the way she did when her thoughts threatened to spill out all at once. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. Elijah closed his laptop partway, giving her more attention than she'd expected. That alone made her heart race faster. "All right," he replied. "Go on." For a moment, Renee couldn't speak. Her mouth felt dry. Her ears rang faintly, a reminder that stress had been living in her body longer than she'd admitted. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I know this is unusual," she said carefully, "and I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position." Elijah's brow creased slightly. "What is this about?" Renee took a breath. "I was hoping you might be willing to lend me some money." The words felt too small for what they carried. Too ordinary. Elijah didn't respond immediately. His face didn't change, but the air between them did. Something tightened, like a door quietly closing partway. "Alone?" he said at last. "Yes," Renee answered. "A temporary one." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Why?" "My mother is ill," she said. Elijah nodded once, slow and thoughtful. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Thank you," Renee replied. She appreciated the courtesy, even if it didn't change anything. "How much are you asking for?" he asked. She hesitated. Saying the number out loud made it real. $20,000. Elijah didn't react the way she expected. No raised eyebrows. No sharp intake of breath. Just a quiet pause. "And you intend to repay this?" he asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "I'll set up automatic payments. Whatever terms you think are fair." Elijah studied her for a long moment. Not in a way that felt predatory but analytical. Like he was weighing more than just numbers. "Why come to me?" he asked. Renee's throat tightened. "Because I don't qualify for another loan. And because I work for you." "That doesn't automatically make me the right person to ask," he said. I know, she replied. That's why I'm not assuming anything. The silence stretched again. Elijah glanced briefly at the clock on the wall, then back at her. You understand the complications this creates? Yes. You understand I could say no? Yes. And you understand that asking puts our professional relationship at risk? Renee nodded. I do. Something about her calm seemed to unsettle him more than panic would have. Sit down, Elijah said suddenly. Renee blinked. Please, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. If we're having this conversation, we'll do it properly. She sat, careful and upright, perching on the edge as if the chair itself might reject her. Elijah folded his hands. Tell me about your mother. Renee swallowed. Her name is Claudette. She worked as a home health aide most of her life. Took care of other people's parents while putting off her own health. What's wrong with her? He asked. She has advanced kidney disease, Renee said. The doctors think it's been developing for years. Elijah frowned slightly. Why wasn't it caught earlier? She didn't want to miss work, Renee said. And she didn't want to be a burden. Elijah leaned back again. And the insurance? It covers some things, Renee said. But not enough. Not fast enough. He was quiet for a long moment. Why now? He asked. Why today? Renee's hands trembled just slightly. Because the doctor called this morning. They want to move forward sooner than expected. And if they don't? Elijah asked. Renee looked down at her hands. Then her options get worse. Elijah exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. You said this was a small loan. For you, she said quietly. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Elijah looked at her sharply. I didn't mean, she began. No, he said. I understand what you meant. Another silence. Renee, he said at last, there are formalities involved in something like this. I expected that, she replied. He nodded. I'll need time to consider. She stood. Of course. She turned to leave, relieved and disappointed all at once. But as she reached the doorway, something inside her twisted painfully. The truth she'd been carrying pressed hard against her chest. Mr. Warren, she said. He looked up. Yes. There's something else you should know, she said. His expression shifted, wary now. What is it? Renee turned back to face him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The reason my mother is sick, she said carefully, has more to do with your family than you realize. Elijah froze. And in that moment, the conversation crossed a line neither of them could step back over. Elijah didn't speak right away. The words Renee had just said hung between them, heavy and unsettling. The reason my mother is sick has more to do with your family than you realize. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a threat. It was worse than both, calm, measured, and impossible to dismiss. He closed his laptop the rest of the way, the soft click sounding louder than it should have. Explain, he said. Renee remained standing near the doorway. She hadn't moved closer, but she hadn't retreated either. Her face was composed, though the muscles in her jaw were tight. My mother didn't always work in healthcare, she said. Before that, she worked at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. Late 90s, early 2000s. Elijah felt a faint tightening in his chest, the kind that came before a memory he didn't want. And, he prompted. They used industrial solvents there, Renee continued. Strong ones. The kind that require protective equipment. Ventilation. Monitoring. Elijah nodded once. Many factories did. Yes, Renee said. Some followed the rules. Some didn't. The room felt smaller. The lake outside the windows had disappeared from Elijah's awareness. What was the name of the company? He asked, already bracing himself. Renee didn't answer immediately. She took a breath, steadying herself. Warren Systems. The name landed hard. Elijah stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's not possible, he said. That company shut down years ago. I know, Renee replied. Before the lawsuit started. He turned away from her, walking toward the windows as if distance might help him think. Warren Systems. His father's company. the foundation of everything he had now. You're saying, Elijah said slowly, that my father's company made your mother sick. I'm saying the exposure she experienced there likely contributed to her condition, Renee said. According to her doctors. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. And you decided to bring this up now? When you're asking me for money? Renee's shoulders stiffened. I didn't plan it this way, she said. I didn't even know who you were when I took this job. I found out later. And you stayed, Elijah said. Yes. Why? Because I needed the work, she replied. And because leaving wouldn't change what already happened. Elijah turned back to face her. Are you threatening legal action? No, Renee said immediately. I'm not threatening anything. Then what is this? He asked sharply. This is context, she said. Not leverage. Elijah studied her, searching for cracks. For anger disguised as composure. For calculation. He found exhaustion. And something else, resolve. You could have gone public, he said. You could have filed a claim. Exposed everything. I could have, she agreed. But my mother didn't want that. She didn't have the energy for a fight she might not live to see finished. Silence pressed in again. Elijah ran a hand through his hair. So you're asking me to pay for my father's mistakes? I'm asking you to help save my mother, Renee said. The past explains why. It's not a weapon. He felt heat rise in his chest. Defensiveness, anger, something dangerously close to guilt. You realize how this sounds, he said. From my perspective. I do, Renee replied. That's why I waited. And why I almost didn't say anything at all. Then why say it now, he asked. Because I need you to understand this isn't charity, she said quietly. And it isn't just a loan. It's responsibility. The word hit him harder than he expected. Responsibility. He looked at the woman standing in his dining room, someone he'd passed dozens of times without really seeing. Someone who had cleaned up after his life while carrying the weight of her own. You planned this, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. No, Renee said. I planned to survive. This just happened along the way. Elijah sank back into his chair, suddenly feeling older than his years. He thought of his father, brilliant, distant, convinced the ends justified everything. He thought of the fortune he'd inherited, the way it had insulated him from consequences he'd never earned. I need time, he said. I understand, Renee replied. She turned to leave again, the conversation clearly over in her mind. Renee, Elijah said. She paused. If I agree to this, he said, there will be no conditions beyond repayment. No silence bought. No favors owed. She nodded. That's fair. She stepped out of the room, her footsteps fading down the hall. Elijah sat alone, staring at the spot where she'd stood. Warren Systems. The name echoed in his head, dragging the past into the present whether he wanted it or not. And for the first time in years, Elijah Warren wasn't sure that money alone could make this problem disappear. Elijah stayed seated long after Renee left the room. The house felt different now. The silence wasn't neutral anymore. It pressed in on him, heavy with things unsaid, with names and years he had spent avoiding. He stared at the closed laptop as if it had betrayed him by not warning him this morning would turn out like this. Warren Systems. He hadn't heard the name spoken out loud in years. Not since the final paperwork had been signed, the assets dissolved, the past neatly boxed and labeled handled. He had told himself he'd been young then. Removed. That whatever decisions his father made belonged to a different era. But the money hadn't belonged to a different era. It was still here. In the walls. In the view of the lake. In the quiet that allowed him to live untouched by other people's messes. Elijah stood and walked slowly through the dining room, his footsteps echoing faintly. He poured himself another cup of coffee, forgot about it halfway through, and left it cooling on the counter. His phone buzzed with a reminder about the board call. He dismissed it. For once the world could wait. Upstairs the vacuum started again. The familiar sound should have settled him. Instead it made his chest tighten. Renee was back to work as if she hadn't just cracked open something he'd spent decades sealing shut. He wondered how long she'd been carrying this. How long she'd walked through his house knowing the connection, scrubbing his floors while her mother's body quietly failed. That thought sat wrong with him. Elijah returned to the table and opened his laptop again, not to work, but to search. Old documents. Archived reports. He hadn't looked at anything related to Warren Systems in years. He told himself it was because there was nothing left to find. He was wrong. The internal report took longer to locate than he expected, buried deep in scanned files and outdated formats. When he finally found it, his stomach dropped. Exposure levels. Safety recommendations. Deferred actions. He read slowly, carefully. The language was clinical, cautious. But the implications were clear. They had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Elijah closed the file and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His father's voice drifted into his memory, uninvited. Calm. Rational. Always certain he was doing what was necessary. You can't save everyone, he used to say. But you can keep the machine running. Elijah had believed him then. He wasn't sure he did now. The vacuum shut off again. Footsteps moved down the stairs. The soft click of the supply closet door. Renee was finishing up. He stood before he realized he was going to. Not to stop her. Not to say anything. Just to see her. To confirm she was still real, not something his conscience had conjured to unsettle him. She emerged from the hallway carrying her bag, moving with the same quiet efficiency as always. When she saw him standing near the table, she froze. I'm done for the day, she said, her tone professional. Neutral. I know, Elijah replied. An awkward pause stretched between them. He could tell she was bracing herself, prepared for anything from rejection to accusation. I meant what I said, he told her. I need time. I understand, Renee said. I didn't expect an answer today. He nodded. I'll be in touch. She hesitated, then gave a small, polite nod and headed for the door. As it closed behind her, Elijah felt something unsettling settle in his chest. Not relief, but anticipation. That night he barely slept. He dreamed of factory floors and flickering lights. Of his father standing just out of reach, speaking words Elijah couldn't hear. He woke before dawn, heart racing, the taste of regret sharp and unfamiliar. By morning he had made a decision. Not the full one, but enough. He called his attorney first. I need a loan agreement drafted, he said. Personal. Not through the company. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For what amount? 20,000, Elijah replied. With flexible repayment terms. And the reason? The attorney asked, out of habit more than necessity. Elijah looked out at the lake. The water was darker today, the sky heavy with clouds. Medical, he said. He ended the call before questions could follow. Then he wired the money. No note. No explanation. Just the transfer, clean and immediate. When it was done, he sat there staring at the confirmation screen, waiting for something to happen inside him. Relief. Closure. Anything. Nothing came. Later that afternoon his phone buzzed. Renee. He stared at her name for a long moment before answering. Yes, he said. I saw the transfer, she said quietly. Her voice sounded steadier than he felt. Thank you. You're welcome, he replied. Another pause. I meant what I said before, she added. About repayment. I know, Elijah said. And, about everything else, she continued. I wasn't trying to put this on you. I know that too, he replied. They ended the call without ceremony. That should have been the end of it. But as Elijah sat alone in his silent house that evening, he realized something uncomfortable. He didn't feel finished. He felt watched, by the past, by choices made long before him, by consequences that didn't care how much distance he tried to put between himself and them. And somewhere in Tacoma, a woman named Claudette lay in a hospital bed, her life tied to his in ways neither of them had chosen. Elijah picked up his keys. He didn't tell himself where he was going, but his body already knew. The drive to Tacoma felt longer than it should have. Elijah had made the trip dozens of times over the years for meetings and site visits, always distracted, always focused on what waited at the other end. This time the road demanded his attention. Every mile marker felt like a quiet question he couldn't answer yet. He kept the radio off. Silence suited the weight in his chest. St. Mary's Medical Center rose from the gray afternoon like a concrete promise. Solid, functional, unromantic. Elijah parked farther away than necessary, then sat in the car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. He hadn't told Renee he was coming. He wasn't sure why he'd come at all. Curiosity, maybe. Or the need to prove to himself that this was real. That the money he'd sent wasn't just another transaction sliding quietly into the past. Inside, the hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The fluorescent lights flattened everything, draining warmth from faces and colors. Elijah followed the signs to the renal wing, feeling conspicuously out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes. At the nurse's station, he hesitated. "I'm here to see Claudette Reynolds," he said finally. The nurse glanced at the chart, then at him. "Family?" "No," Elijah said. The word felt insufficient. "An acquaintance." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Room 417. The hallway was quiet, punctuated by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the distant squeak of a cart. Elijah slowed as he approached the room, suddenly unsure. He could still turn around. No one had asked him to be here. But his hand reached for the door anyway. Claudette lay propped against white pillows, her frame smaller than he'd imagined. Her skin was a muted brown, stretched thin over delicate bones. Gray threaded through her hair, pulled back neatly. She looked tired but not fragile. Her eyes flicked toward the door as it opened. "You must be Mr. Warren," she said. Elijah stopped short. "Yes." She gave a faint smile. "You look like someone who doesn't come to hospitals unless he has to." He huffed a quiet breath. "That's probably true." "Sit," Claudette said, gesturing toward the chair beside her bed. There was no hesitation in her voice. No uncertainty. It wasn't a request so much as an expectation. Elijah sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The monitor beside her ticked softly, marking time neither of them could afford to waste. "My daughter said you helped," Claudette said at last. "Yes," Elijah replied. "I did." "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, unembellished. "Honest." "You're welcome," he said. She studied him, her gaze sharp despite the fatigue lining her face. "You seem uncomfortable." Elijah considered lying. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say." "That's all right," Claudette said. "Most people aren't." She shifted slightly, wincing before settling again. Elijah noticed the effort it took, the way pain lived just beneath her composure. "I know about the company," she said quietly. He stiffened. "Renee told you." "She did," Claudette replied. "And before you ask, no, she didn't plan it. She doesn't have a calculating bone in her body." "I didn't think she did," Elijah said. Claudette nodded as if confirming something for herself. "I worked at Warren Systems for almost 9 years." Elijah swallowed. "I'm sorry." She waved a hand weakly. "Don't apologize yet. I'm not finished." He stayed silent. "We didn't know what we were handling back then," Claudette continued. "Or maybe we did, but not enough to understand what it would cost us later. You trust that the people in charge are looking out for you." Her eyes flicked back to his. "Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're just looking out for the company." Elijah felt the familiar rise of defensiveness, and pushed it down. "I don't know what my father knew," he said carefully. Claudette gave a thin smile. "I do." His chest tightened. "You do?" "Yes," she said. "Because he came to my house." The words hit harder than Renee's revelation ever had. "He came to your house?" Elijah repeated. "One night," Claudette said. "Late." "He didn't stay long." She stared toward the window, her voice steady but distant. "He told me to get checked. Told me to keep copies of my records. Said things were complicated." Elijah shook his head slowly. "He never told me." "I didn't expect him to," Claudette replied. "Men like him don't confess. They warn quietly and hope that's enough." Elijah leaned back, the weight of it pressing down on him. "So he knew." "He knew enough," she said. "Not enough to stop it. Enough to feel uneasy." The monitor beeped softly between them. I didn't keep my records to sue, Claudette added. I kept them so I wouldn't forget. So when my body started failing, I'd know it wasn't my imagination. Elijah stared at his hands. Then why not go after the company? Because by the time I understood what was happening, she said, the company was gone. And I was tired. She turned back to him. What you did matters. I wired money, Elijah said. That's not. It matters, Claudette interrupted gently. Because you didn't have to show up. Outside the room, unseen, Renee stood frozen in the hallway. She had arrived moments earlier, grocery bag in hand, intending to surprise her mother. Instead, she watched through the narrow glass panel as the two people she loved and feared most sat facing each other. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Inside the room, Claudette spoke again. There's one more thing you should know, Mr. Warren. Elijah looked up. What is it? She met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. I never told my daughter everything your father said that night. And just like that, the ground beneath all of them shifted again. Renee didn't move. She stood just outside the hospital room, grocery bag cutting into her fingers, forgotten. Through the narrow glass panel in the door, she could see her mother's profile and the back of Elijah Warren's head. Two worlds that were never supposed to meet, now sitting inches apart. Her chest felt tight. She hadn't expected this. Not him. Not here. Inside the room, Elijah leaned forward slightly, his attention fixed on Claudette. What didn't you tell her? He asked. Claudette's fingers curled slowly against the thin blanket. Not because I wanted to protect you, she said, but because I didn't want to burden her. Elijah waited. Your father didn't just warn me, Claudette continued. He offered to help. Elijah's breath caught. Help how? He said he could arrange medical testing. Quietly. Off the books, she said. No paper trail. No questions. Elijah felt a sharp twist in his chest. And you refused. Yes, Claudette replied. Because I didn't trust what silence would cost me later. The words sat heavy between them. He told me I was brave, she added. Then he told me I was foolish. Elijah looked down, the image of his father rearranging itself in his mind. Not villain. Not hero. Something far more unsettling. A man who knew just enough to be afraid. Outside, Renee shifted her weight, heart pounding. She had never heard this part of the story. Her mother had always framed the past in fragments, softened edges, half explanations. Inside the room, Elijah spoke carefully. Why tell me now? Because you're different, Claudette said. And because my daughter brought you into this without knowing how deep it went. Elijah glanced toward the door as if sensing someone there. Renee stepped back instinctively, her back pressing against the wall. She stared down the hallway, breathing shallowly, trying to steady herself. She felt like she was eavesdropping on a life she thought she understood. Inside, Claudette continued. You inherited his money, she said. But not his fear. Elijah swallowed. I don't know that. You came here, Claudette replied. That tells me enough. The monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to the history unraveling in the room. I didn't come to be forgiven, Elijah said quietly. Good, Claudette replied. Because I'm not offering forgiveness. The honesty of it stung more than anger would have. What I am offering, she went on, is the truth. You can do what you want with it. Elijah nodded slowly. Renee doesn't know about the offer he made you. No, Claudette said. And I don't intend to tell her. Why? Because she spent her whole life cleaning up after other people's messes, Claudette replied. She doesn't need to carry his too. Elijah leaned back, exhaling. The room felt too small for everything he was learning. Outside, Renee finally forced herself to move. She stepped down the hallway, then stopped, guilt and confusion twisting inside her. She hadn't meant to overhear. But she couldn't pretend she hadn't. She looked down at the grocery bag. Soup. Fresh fruit. Things meant to make her mother smile. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from the hospital billing office. She didn't open it. Inside the room, Claudette shifted again, fatigue settling visibly into her bones. You should go, she said to Elijah. My daughter will be back any minute. He nodded, rising slowly. Thank you for telling me. She studied him one last time. Be careful what you do next, Mr. Warren. Quiet choices still echo. Elijah stepped toward the door. He opened it and found Renee standing there. They froze. For a heartbeat, none of them spoke. Renee's eyes flicked from Elijah to her mother, then back again. She knew instantly that something had changed. She began, then stopped. Elijah stepped aside, giving her space. I didn't know you were here, he said. I just arrived, Renee replied, her voice tight. Claudette watched them both, saying nothing. Renee set the grocery bag down slowly. What's going on? Elijah looked at Claudette. Claudette met his gaze, then nodded once. Come sit, she said to her daughter. It's time you heard the rest. Renee's stomach dropped. She moved toward the bed, her mind racing, already sensing that whatever came next would change how she saw the past, and the man who employed her. And Elijah realized, standing there in that sterile hallway, that the hardest part of this story was only just beginning. Renee sat down slowly, as if the chair might disappear beneath her. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. The steady beep of the monitor sounded louder, more insistent, like it was counting down to something none of them could see. Claudette rested her hand on the blanket, fingers trembling just slightly. There are things I didn't tell you, she said. Not because I lied. Because I thought silence was safer. Renee swallowed. About Elijah? About his family, Claudette replied. And about you. Elijah stayed near the door, unsure whether to leave or stay. Claudette's eyes flicked to him. You can hear this, she said. You're already part of it. That made Renee's chest tighten. She glanced at Elijah, searching his face for answers, but his expression was guarded. Careful. Almost afraid. Claudette took a breath. When I was pregnant with you, I didn't know who your father was. Not for sure. Renee blinked. Mom? I knew the truth, Claudette continued, but I didn't want to believe it. Renee's pulse thudded in her ears. What truth? Claudette turned her head slightly, meeting her daughter's eyes. Your father was connected to the Warrens. Elijah stiffened. Renee felt the words land but not fully register. Connected how? Not blood, Claudette said quickly. Not like that. But close enough that it scared people. Renee frowned, confusion mixing with something colder. You're saying? I'm saying that your existence threatened someone's reputation, Claudette said. And people with money don't like uncertainty. Elijah finally spoke. My father believed rumors, he said quietly. He believed someone had been careless. That a mistake might surface. Renee stared at him. So you knew? I knew there was a story, Elijah replied. I didn't know it involved you. Claudette closed her eyes briefly. Your father came to me after you were born. He didn't threaten me. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Renee leaned forward. Then what did he do? He smiled, Claudette said, and explained how the world works. Elijah flinched. He said children like you grow up asking questions, Claudette continued. And questions make noise. Noise attracts attention. Renee felt anger rise, hot and sharp. So he wanted to erase me? No, Claudette replied. He wanted to control the story. Silence fell again. He offered me money, Claudette said. Housing. Protection. All I had to do was keep my mouth shut and stay invisible. Renee's hands curled into fists. And you refused. I refused to sell you, Claudette said simply. Elijah's voice was barely above a whisper. He never told me this. I know, Claudette replied. That was the deal. Renee shook her head, struggling to piece everything together. So all those years, struggling, working 2 jobs, that wasn't just life? It was life, Claudette said gently. But it was also a choice. Renee felt something crack inside her. Pride tangled painfully with grief. Elijah stepped forward. I didn't come here to defend him, he said. And I won't. Renee looked at him sharply. Then why are you here? He hesitated. Because I found documents in my father's private files. Medical records. Correspondence. Things that didn't add up. Claudette's eyes narrowed. What kind of things? Records that suggest he continued watching, Elijah said. Even after you refused. Renee's stomach dropped. Watching who? You, Elijah said. Both of you. The room seemed to tilt. So my whole life, Renee said slowly, someone was checking in on me? Yes, Elijah replied. And not quietly. Renee pushed herself up from the chair, pacing once before stopping. That's why opportunities disappeared. Why scholarships fell through. Why doors almost opened then slammed shut. Claudette looked away. Elijah nodded. Control doesn't always look like punishment, he said. Sometimes it looks like limitation. Renee turned to her mother. Why didn't you tell me? Claudette's voice broke. Because I didn't want you to feel watched. Renee laughed once, sharp and humorless. Too late. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. The same number. She pulled it out this time and opened the message. Her breath caught. It says my insurance coverage has been flagged for review, Renee said. Effective immediately. Elijah went still. Claudette's eyes widened. That's not possible. Elijah's jaw tightened. Unless someone reactivated an old system. Renee looked up at him, fear and fury mixing in her eyes. Your father's system? He didn't answer right away. I thought I shut everything down, he said finally. But if someone else has access. The monitor beeped again. Steady. Unforgiving. Renee felt the weight of it all settle onto her shoulders. So what happens now? Elijah met her gaze, something dark and resolute forming behind his eyes. Now, he said, we find out who's still pulling the strings. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a quiet decision was already being made, one that would force Renee to confront just how far the past was willing to reach to protect itself. Renee slept in short, broken stretches that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw invisible hands adjusting her life like dials. Turning opportunities down. Turning pressure up. She woke before dawn to the sound of machines humming and carts rattling down the hallway. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the pale walls, the curtain half drawn, her mother's fragile shape in the bed, and everything came rushing back. Claudette was awake, staring at the ceiling. You didn't sleep, Renee said quietly. I slept enough, Claudette replied. Her voice sounded thin like it had been worn down over time. Did you? Renee shook her head and pulled the chair closer. The morning light revealed every small detail Renee had missed before. The bruising on her mother's arm from IVs, the dryness of her lips, the way her chest rose with effort. Mom, Renee said, choosing her words carefully, there's something else I need to know. Claudette turned her head. Ask. Did anyone ever come to you again? Renee asked. After that first time? Claudette hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. Yes, she said. But not him. Renee's stomach tightened. Then who? A woman, Claudette said. Years later. She said she worked for a foundation. Claimed they helped families stay stable. Renee frowned. What kind of foundation? One that didn't have a website, Claudette replied. And didn't leave a business card. The room felt colder. She knew things, Claudette continued. Your school. Your friends. Your part-time job at the grocery store. Things I hadn't told anyone. Renee's hands clenched around the chair arms. What did she want? She wanted me to sign something, Claudette said. A statement. It said I'd fabricated the story about your father. That I was mistaken. Emotional. Confused. Renee's breath caught. And you said no. I laughed, Claudette said softly. Which probably wasn't wise. Renee leaned forward. What happened after that? Nothing obvious, Claudette replied. But the rent went up. My hours got cut. Your scholarship interview was suddenly postponed. Renee closed her eyes. The memories lined up too neatly now. Too clean. A knock sounded at the door before either of them could speak again. Elijah stepped in, dressed more casually than Renee had seen him before. No tailored suit. No polished shoes. Just a dark jacket and tired eyes. I brought coffee, he said, lifting the cup slightly. And news. Renee stood. Good or bad? Elijah hesitated. Both. Claudette watched him closely. Start with the truth, she said. Elijah nodded. I pulled archived access logs overnight. Someone has been using my father's old compliance software. Renee felt her chest tighten. Using it how? Flagging accounts, Elijah said. Medical billing systems. Insurance providers. Quiet pressure points. Renee's phone buzzed again right on cue. She looked at the screen and felt her stomach drop. They're denying coverage, she said. They're calling it a reassessment. Elijah exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. Renee looked up at him sharply. Sorry doesn't fix this. No, he agreed. But leverage might. Claudette frowned. What kind of leverage? Elijah reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. My father kept contingency files, he said. People he protected. And people he feared. Renee's heart pounded. Feared? Regulators, Elijah said. Journalists. Former partners who didn't disappear quietly. Renee crossed her arms. And where do we fit into that? Elijah met her gaze. You're not in the files. That's the problem. Claudette's brow creased. Explain. You were never meant to exist publicly, Elijah said. Which means whoever is still operating this system doesn't want you asking questions. Renee let out a short, bitter laugh. Too late for that. Elijah's phone vibrated. He glanced at it, then frowned. What? Renee asked. There's been a request, he said slowly. For access to your mother's updated medical records. Claudette's eyes widened. From who? Elijah swallowed. A third-party audit group. Renee felt ice crawl up her spine. That sounds official. It's meant to, Elijah replied. But it's not standard. Not this fast. Claudette reached for Renee's hand. They're trying to scare you. Renee squeezed back. They're trying to corner us. Elijah nodded. And if they succeed, they control the timeline. Renee looked between them, her fear hardening into something sharper. So we don't wait. Elijah's jaw tightened. No, he said. We move first. Just then, a nurse appeared at the door, her expression tight and professional. Miss Taylor, she said to Renee. Administration needs to speak with you. Immediately. Renee's heart skipped. About what? She asked. The nurse hesitated. Your mother's care authorization. Renee felt Claudette's grip tighten. And as Renee followed the nurse into the hallway, she had the sudden, chilling realization that someone had just taken their next step, for them. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. Renee followed the nurse past rooms with half-closed curtains and blinking monitors, each step tightening the knot in her chest. People moved around her like nothing was wrong. Doctors laughing quietly, a janitor whistling, a couple arguing over a vending machine. The normalcy felt cruel. They stopped outside a glass-walled office near the nurse's station. Wait here, the nurse said, already turning away. Renee watched her disappear, then looked through the glass. Two people sat inside. One was a man in a gray suit, early 40s, posture stiff, hands folded like he was about to deliver bad news. The other was a woman Renee didn't recognize, older, sharp-eyed, dressed too neatly for a hospital visit. The woman looked up and met Renee's gaze through the glass. She smiled. Not kindly. A moment later, the door opened. Miss Taylor, the man said, standing. Please come in. Renee stepped inside, heart pounding. The door clicked shut behind her. I'm Daniel Price, the man said. Hospital administration. The woman remained seated. And I'm with an external compliance review group, she added smoothly. You can call me Miss Keaton. Renee stayed standing. Why am I here? Daniel cleared his throat. There's been a complication regarding your mother's coverage. Renee crossed her arms. I'm aware. It was active yesterday. Miss Keaton tilted her head. Coverage statuses change all the time. Not like this, Renee shot back. Not overnight. Not during treatment. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. The issue isn't timing. It's documentation. Renee felt a cold wave roll through her. What documentation? Miss Keaton slid a folder across the desk. Consent and authorization forms, she said. Some inconsistencies. Renee didn't touch it. My mother signed everything. Daniel nodded quickly. Yes, but an audit flagged potential third-party interference. Renee laughed short and sharp. That's rich. Miss Keaton's eyes narrowed just slightly. You should be careful with your tone. Renee leaned forward, planting her hands on the desk. You flagged my mother's insurance hours after someone requested her medical records. That's not a coincidence. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked at Miss Keaton, then back at Renee. Miss Taylor, no one is accusing you of wrongdoing. But you're treating me like I did something wrong, Renee said. Miss Keaton stood. She was taller than Renee expected. We're simply ensuring compliance, she said. Your mother's case is sensitive. Renee's pulse spiked. Sensitive how? Miss Keaton smiled again. You know exactly how. Renee felt it then. The certainty. This woman wasn't here for paperwork. She was here to remind Renee of something. Let me guess, Renee said quietly. You're not actually independent. Miss Keaton's smile didn't fade. Independence is a matter of perspective. Renee straightened. You don't get to scare me into silence. Daniel raised his hands. No one is asking for silence. Miss Keaton stepped closer. We're asking for cooperation. And if I don't? Renee asked. Miss Keaton's voice lowered. Then authorizations take time. Reviews take time. And time, she said, glancing toward the hallway, is something your mother doesn't have much of. Renee's vision blurred with rage. You're using her illness as leverage, she said. Miss Keaton met her gaze. I'm acknowledging reality. The door suddenly opened. Elijah stood there, jaw tight, phone in his hand. Actually, he said, you're violating 3 hospital protocols and at least 1 federal statute. Daniel froze. Sir, this is a private meeting. Elijah didn't move. It stopped being private when coercion entered the room. Miss Keaton turned slowly. You shouldn't be here. Elijah smiled without humor. Funny. I was about to say the same thing. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I just sent a copy of this interaction, he said, lifting his phone slightly, to a legal contact who specializes in healthcare interference. Daniel's face drained of color. You can't. I can, Elijah said. And I did. Miss Keaton studied him carefully. You're the son, she said. Elijah's eyes hardened. And you're overreaching. Renee felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Miss Keaton straightened her jacket. This isn't over. Elijah nodded. No, it isn't. Miss Keaton turned to Renee. You should consider how much you're willing to lose for the truth. Renee met her stare. You should consider how much you've underestimated me. Miss Keaton paused, then walked out. Daniel followed quickly, muttering apologies. The room fell quiet. Renee exhaled, her hands shaking. That woman knew. Elijah nodded. She was sent to apply pressure. Renee looked at him. By who? Elijah hesitated. That's what worries me. Renee's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a denial. It was a notification. Coverage temporarily reinstated. Pending further review. Renee looked up slowly. This is a pause, she said. Not a win. Elijah's expression darkened. Agreed. Outside the office, through the glass, Renee saw Miss Keaton stop at the end of the hall. She turned once more. And watched. Renee didn't go back to her mother's room right away. She stood by a tall window at the end of the hallway, watching traffic crawl along the street below. Headlights blurred together in the early evening, red and white streaks sliding past one another without stopping. Everyone was going somewhere. Everyone had somewhere else to be. She felt oddly suspended, like if she moved too fast something would snap. Elijah stood a few steps behind her, giving her space. He hadn't said much since Miss Keaton left. His silence felt deliberate, like he was weighing every word before letting it out. They didn't expect you, Renee said finally. Elijah shook his head. They expected fear. She turned to him. And what did they get? A faint, tired smile crossed his face. Resistance. Renee folded her arms, then dropped them again. She couldn't stay still. You knew who she was the second she spoke. I recognized the language, Elijah said. Compliance audits don't threaten people. Power brokers do. Renee stared at him. How many times did you see that growing up? He looked away. Enough. They walked back toward Claudette's room together. The sounds of the hospital grew louder again. Overhead announcements, footsteps, murmured conversations. Renee felt exposed, like every stranger passing by could somehow see straight through her. Claudette was awake, eyes alert despite the exhaustion etched into her face. Did they try anything? She asked the moment Renee stepped inside. Renee pulled the chair closer to the bed. They tried to scare me. Claudette nodded once. Did it work? Renee met her mother's gaze. No. Claudette exhaled, a small sound of relief escaping her. Good. Elijah leaned against the wall. Coverage is temporarily reinstated, he said. But they'll come back. In a different form. Claudette studied him. You sound certain. They don't retreat, Elijah replied. They reroute. Renee rubbed her temples. So what do we do now? Claudette reached out and took her hand. Her grip was weaker than it used to be but still steady. You live honestly, she said. That's the one thing they can't predict. Renee swallowed. That hasn't protected us so far. No, Claudette said gently. But it's kept us intact. A nurse came in to check vitals, offering polite smiles and avoiding eye contact like she'd been trained to do. When she left, the room felt quieter than before. Claudette shifted slightly. There's something else, she said. Renee's stomach tightened. Mom? I didn't tell you everything, Claudette continued. Not because I wanted to hide it. Because I was afraid of what it might cost you. Elijah straightened. Renee leaned forward. What didn't you tell me? Claudette's eyes flicked toward Elijah, then back to Renee. After the woman from the foundation came. I didn't just say no. Renee frowned. What do you mean? I filed a report, Claudette said. With a local legal clinic. Pro bono. I gave them names. Dates. Copies of letters. Renee's heart pounded. You never said. They told me to wait, Claudette said. They said these things take time. Elijah's expression sharpened. Do you still have those records? Claudette nodded slowly. Not here. Renee's voice dropped. Where? In a safety deposit box, Claudette said. I opened it years ago. Just in case. Elijah pushed off the wall. That changes things. Renee looked between them. How? It means there's a paper trail, Elijah said. Independent. Time-stamped. Renee felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Thin, fragile, but real. And it means, Claudette added softly, that someone might already know more than they want you to realize. A knock sounded at the door again. This time it wasn't gentle. A uniformed security officer stood outside, posture stiff. Miss Taylor, he said. There's someone asking for you at the front desk. Renee's chest tightened. Who? The officer hesitated. She wouldn't give a name. Just said you'd recognize her. Renee and Elijah exchanged a look. Claudette squeezed Renee's hand. Be careful, she whispered. Renee stood, her pulse racing. I will. As she followed the officer down the hallway, her phone buzzed in her pocket. One new message. A photo. Was an old one. Grainy. Taken from across a street. Claudette. Younger. Holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. A caption appeared beneath it. You should have stayed invisible. Renee stopped walking. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just about control anymore. It was about retaliation. Renee didn't show the photo to the security officer. She slid her phone back into her pocket and forced her feet to move again, even though every instinct screamed at her to turn around. The hallway felt longer than before. Brighter. Too exposed. She could feel eyes on her, though when she glanced around, no one was looking. At the front desk, a woman stood with her back to the counter. She wore a beige coat, neatly pressed, and carried a structured black purse that looked expensive but understated. Her hair was streaked with gray, pulled back in a low knot. She didn't turn when Renee approached. I was told you were asking for me, Renee said. The woman turned slowly. It was the same face from the glass office. The same sharp eyes. Miss Keaton. Renee's heart dropped, but she kept her voice steady. You don't belong here. Miss Keaton smiled politely, like they were two acquaintances who'd run into each other by chance. Hospitals are public places. Not for intimidation, Renee said. Miss Keaton leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. That depends on perspective. Renee felt her phone burn in her pocket. You sent the photo. Miss Keaton's eyes flicked down, then back up. I wanted to be sure you understood the seriousness of the situation. That photo is from decades ago, Renee said. How did you get it? Miss Keaton adjusted the strap of her purse. People leave traces everywhere. Old film. Old neighbors. Old favors. Renee clenched her jaw. You're threatening my mother. Miss Keaton sighed softly. I'm reminding you that choices echo. Renee stepped closer. If anything happens to her, I'll burn every bridge you're standing on. For the first time, Miss Keaton's smile wavered. Just barely. You're emotional, she said. That's understandable. But you're miscalculating. Renee tilted her head. Am I? Miss Keaton straightened. Your mother made a decision years ago that disrupted carefully maintained narratives. Those narratives still matter to people with reach. Renee's voice dropped. My mother chose to protect me. And in doing so, Miss Keaton replied, she created risk. Risk to who? Renee asked. Miss Keaton didn't answer right away. She glanced around the lobby, then back at Renee. There are conversations happening right now that you're not part of, she said. Outcomes being discussed. Renee felt a chill crawl up her spine. You think I'll back down? I think you'll prioritize survival, Miss Keaton said. Most people do. Renee pulled her phone out and unlocked it. Then let me show you something. She opened her messages, scrolled, then held the screen up just enough for Miss Keaton to see. Miss Keaton's eyes narrowed. That photo you sent me? Renee said quietly. I forwarded it. Time-stamped. With metadata. To someone who understands patterns. Miss Keaton's posture stiffened. You're bluffing. Renee shook her head. I'm done being quiet. A long moment passed between them. You don't know what you're stepping into, Miss Keaton said finally. Renee's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. Neither did my mother. And she survived. Miss Keaton studied her face, searching for weakness. Whatever she found, or didn't, made her look away first. This conversation never happened, Miss Keaton said. Renee laughed softly. You really don't understand, do you? Miss Keaton turned and walked toward the exit without another word. Renee stood there until the doors slid closed behind her. Only then did she realize she was shaking. She went back upstairs fast, her thoughts racing. By the time she reached Claudette's room, Elijah was already there, pacing. You got the message, he said the moment he saw her face. She found me, Renee replied. At the front desk. Claudette's eyes widened. What did she say? She wanted me scared, Renee said. And she wanted me alone. Elijah stopped pacing. Did she threaten you directly? Renee hesitated. She reminded me of history. Claudette closed her eyes. That woman doesn't act without permission. Renee sat down, pulling out her phone. Then we need to move faster. Elijah leaned over her shoulder as she opened an encrypted email thread. I sent the photo, Renee said. And everything else. To the legal clinic you mentioned. And to one more person. Elijah frowned. Who? Renee looked up at him. A journalist. The room went silent. A real one, Renee added. Not a blog. Investigative. Healthcare interference. Corporate influence. Claudette's voice was barely audible. That will make noise. Yes, Renee said. That's the point. Elijah ran a hand through his hair. Once that door opens, it doesn't close. Renee nodded. I know. Her phone buzzed again. New message. Unknown number. This isn't the leverage you think it is. Renee locked the screen and looked at her mother. They're panicking, she said. Claudette reached for her hand, eyes steady despite the fear. Then stay brave. Renee squeezed back. Because for the first time, the silence they'd been forced into was breaking. And whatever came next wouldn't be quiet. The next morning, the hospital hummed with its usual rhythm: machines, footsteps, distant conversations. But Renee felt it like a drumbeat in her chest. She had barely slept, haunted by the photo, Miss Keaton's words, and the realization that the people orchestrating all of this weren't just faceless powers. They were precise, patient, and dangerous. Elijah arrived before she could even finish breakfast. His coat hung over his arm, tie loosened, eyes sharp. "Morning," he said, not as a greeting but as an alert. Renee glanced up from the coffee she hadn't touched. "Morning," she replied, voice brittle. "Do you have news?" "Yes," Elijah said, walking to the window and staring at the street below. "I tracked who Miss Keaton reports to. It's not just the foundation she claimed to represent. She's a contractor. Independent, technically, but funded by connections I'd hoped were inactive." Renee frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning this isn't just intimidation," he said. "It's surveillance, financial leverage, and potential legal pressure rolled into one. And it's ongoing." Renee felt her stomach twist. "So we're still targets?" Elijah nodded slowly. "And probably more exposed than before." Claudette stirred in her bed. "Don't let them see fear," she said softly. "That's their leverage." Renee took a deep breath. "I know, Mom. I know." The three of them huddled over the laptop Elijah had brought. He typed quickly, pulling up charts, emails, and logs. Renee watched, absorbing every detail, the patterns of manipulation revealing themselves piece by piece. Each data point, each timestamped message connected to another. A network of control that had touched every corner of her life. "They knew about you," Elijah said, scrolling through one encrypted folder. "And they watched you through your mother's medical interactions." That photo, Renee, it was a reminder, not just a threat. They could pull history to justify control. Renee clenched her fists. "They underestimated me." Claudette reached over, holding her daughter's hand. "They always do. But it's more than that. This is about survival. Your choices now shape more than just you." Elijah stopped typing. "I need you to do something." "What?" Renee asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I want you to give a statement. Detailed. Your experiences. Everything Miss Keaton tried to manipulate. Every attempt to pressure your mother or you." Renee's eyes widened. "You mean a legal statement?" "Yes," Elijah said. "This becomes evidence. Official. Time-stamped. Can't be ignored." Claudette nodded. "I'll help." Renee took a deep breath, heart racing. "All right. Let's do it." They started typing. Every detail, every memory, every attempt at intimidation, all logged carefully. Renee found herself recalling things she hadn't consciously thought about in years. The scholarship that never came through, strange letters she dismissed, calls that went unanswered. Each incident now took on a sinister coherence. Hours passed. They barely spoke except to clarify dates or events. By midday, Renee leaned back, exhausted, eyes stinging. Elijah looked at her seriously. "You're stronger than you think." Renee let out a small, humorless laugh. "Or maybe just stubborn." Claudette smiled faintly. "Stubbornness has its place," she said. Just as they were about to save the compiled file, Renee's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, expecting another threat. Instead, it was an anonymous email. "You're stirring things that were meant to lie quietly. Be careful who you trust. They watch even your allies." Renee's hands shook slightly. "They know we're documenting everything." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then it's no longer about survival. It's about exposing them before they act." Claudette squeezed Renee's hand. "Then we finish this together. No running. No silence." Renee nodded, determination setting into her bones. Together. Outside the hospital window, a figure in a dark coat paused across the street, watching. Invisible, patient, calculating. But Renee no longer felt small. She felt ready. Because now they had evidence, and evidence can change everything. And somewhere in that quiet vigilance, Renee realized the first twist of their story wasn't the threats. The first twist was the discovery that the people she thought were untouchable could be challenged. The next step would be harder, sharper, more dangerous. But for the first time, Renee felt like she was in control of at least part of the game. And that control, however fragile, was a weapon. A faint sound of her phone buzzed again. She didn't check it. Not yet. Because the calm before the storm was just as important as the storm itself. The hospital room felt different after that. Not quieter. Not calmer. Just sharper, like the air itself had learned to listen. Renee sat beside her mother's bed, rereading the statement they'd finalized and sent less than an hour earlier. Every sentence felt heavier now that it existed outside her head. Words had a way of turning into weapons once they were shared. Elijah stood near the window again, phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in low tones, pacing once, then stopping. "Yes," he said. "I understand. No, I didn't authorize that. Because it wasn't supposed to be active." Renee watched him closely. His shoulders were tight. Controlled but barely. He ended the call and looked at her. "They're reacting faster than I expected." Renee's pulse jumped. "How?" "The board," Elijah said, "of my father's old firm. They convened an emergency meeting this morning." Claudette's eyes opened slowly. "That company hasn't existed in years." "On paper," Elijah replied. "But its systems do. And so does its influence." Renee stood. "What does an emergency meeting mean for us?" Elijah hesitated. "It means someone thinks they're losing control." A nurse entered, followed by a hospital social worker Renee hadn't seen before. The woman introduced herself politely, clipboard tucked under her arm, smile practiced. "I'm here to review discharge planning options," she said. Claudette frowned. "Discharge? I'm not going anywhere." The social worker nodded. "Of course. This is just procedural." Renee felt the tension spike instantly. "Procedural based on what?" The woman paused. "Based on a recommendation from utilization review." Renee's jaw tightened. "That sounds familiar." The social worker glanced down at her clipboard. "Your mother's case has been flagged for reassessment." Again. Elijah stepped forward. "On what grounds?" The woman looked uncomfortable. "I don't have full details. Only that extended inpatient care may not be approved." Renee felt her chest tighten. "You're trying to send her home." "I'm trying to do my job," the social worker said gently. Claudette reached for Renee's hand. "It's happening again," she whispered. Elijah's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up sharply. "They just froze a charitable grant that funds part of this wing." Renee stared at him. "You're saying?" "I'm saying pressure is being applied from multiple angles," Elijah said. "Fast." The social worker cleared her throat. "I'll give you some time," she said, backing toward the door. "But decisions will need to be made." When she left, the room felt like it was closing in. Renee paced once, then stopped. "They're trying to exhaust us." "Yes," Elijah said. "Force you into compliance through attrition." Claudette's voice was steady, even as her hand trembled. "I've lived under that kind of pressure before." Renee turned to her. "You shouldn't have to do this again." Claudette met her eyes. "Neither should you. Which is why you can't back down now." Elijah's phone buzzed again. This time his face changed completely. "What?" Renee asked. He looked up slowly. "The journalist you contacted," they responded. Renee's heart leapt. "Already?" "Yes," Elijah said. "And they're not asking for more time." Claudette sat up slightly. "What are they asking for?" Elijah swallowed. "They want to meet. In person. Today." Renee felt a rush of fear and adrenaline collide in her chest. "That's fast." "It's risky," Elijah agreed. "And it means they think this is bigger than we do." Claudette exhaled. "Or more dangerous." Renee looked between them. "If we do this, there's no controlling the narrative anymore." Elijah nodded. "Exposure cuts both ways." Renee glanced at her mother, then down at her phone. Another message had come in. Unknown number. "This is your last opportunity to walk away quietly." Renee locked the screen without replying. She lifted her head. "We meet the journalist." Elijah studied her. "You're sure?" Renee's voice was calm, but something unbreakable sat beneath it. They've been deciding things for us my whole life. That ends now. Claudette squeezed her hand. Then go, she said softly. And don't let them rewrite the truth. Elijah nodded once. I'll arrange it. As he stepped out to make the call, Renee moved closer to her mother's bed, resting her forehead briefly against Claudette's hand. I'm scared, she admitted. Claudette smiled faintly. That means you're paying attention. Renee straightened just as her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a location. And beneath it, one line. Come alone. Renee's breath caught. Because whoever sent it wasn't asking anymore. They were daring her. Renee stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Come alone. The words felt heavier than the threats that had come before. Threats were loud. This was quiet. Deliberate. She slipped the phone into her pocket just as Elijah came back into the room. One look at her face told him everything. They sent something, he said. Yes, Renee replied. A location. Claudette's eyes sharpened. Who? They didn't say, Renee said. But they want me alone. Elijah shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. Renee met his gaze. They're not asking. That's exactly why you don't go, he said. This is how people disappear into legal fog. Or worse. Claudette shifted in the bed, wincing slightly, then forced herself upright. Renee, she said carefully, you don't owe them anything. Renee walked to the window and looked out. The sky was low and gray like it was pressing down on the city. I owe myself answers, she said. And they think I'm still the girl who stayed quiet. Elijah stepped closer. You don't know who sent that. I know why, Renee said. They want to separate me from you. From the records. From witnesses. And that's why it's dangerous, Elijah replied. Renee turned back to him. It's dangerous either way. Silence stretched between them. Claudette broke it. If you go, she said softly, you don't go unprepared. Elijah exhaled through his nose. I can have someone nearby. Not obvious. Someone I trust. Renee shook her head. They'll notice. Then we don't let them, Elijah said. I'll track your location. Audio too. Renee hesitated. If they find that. They already assume we're recording everything, Elijah said. That's not the leverage anymore. Renee closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. Fine. But if anything feels wrong, I walk. Elijah's jaw tightened. Promise me. I promise, Renee said. Claudette reached out and pulled her daughter's hand to her chest. You come back, she said simply. Renee leaned down and kissed her mother's forehead. I will. The location led her to a cafe on the edge of downtown. Neutral. Busy enough to disappear in. Quiet enough for conversation. Renee arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window, back straight, hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. She felt every second tick by. At exactly the time listed, a man sat down across from her without asking. He was older than she expected. Late 50s maybe. Gray hair cut close, face lined but not unkind. He wore a dark coat and carried nothing but a slim notebook. Miss Taylor, he said. Thank you for coming. Renee didn't smile. You asked. He nodded. I did. You said come alone, she said. Why? He glanced around the cafe before meeting her eyes again. Because there are conversations that only work when no one is performing for an audience. Renee's fingers tightened around the cup. You're not the journalist. No, he said calmly. I'm the reason the journalist is interested. Renee felt her pulse spike. Then start talking. He opened his notebook but didn't look at it. Your mother was right to refuse that money years ago, he said. It saved you from becoming an asset. Renee froze. You knew her. I knew of her, he corrected. I worked risk management. Not for the company you're thinking of. Adjacent to it. Renee's voice dropped. You were part of it. I was part of stopping it, he said. Sometimes. She searched his face for lies and found none that were obvious. That unsettled her more than anger would have. Miss Keaton works for a successor network, he continued. Unofficial. Funded through shell nonprofits. Designed to clean up unfinished messes. Like me, Renee said. Like uncertainty, he replied. Renee leaned forward. Why meet me now? Because the system is fracturing, he said. Your statement triggered audits they can't control. And because someone on the inside is trying to pin this on you. Her stomach dropped. Pin what on me? Extortion, he said. Fabrication. Interference. Renee felt cold spread through her chest. That's a lie. I know, he said. But lies move faster when money carries them. She swallowed. Why warn me? He closed the notebook. Because I helped build parts of the framework they're using. And because I don't want to see it destroy someone who never consented to be part of it. Renee stared at him. What do you want? For you to survive what's coming, he said. And for you to understand this, exposure alone won't protect you. Renee's phone vibrated in her pocket. One short buzz. Elijah's signal. Still connected. What will? Renee asked. The man stood. Timing, he said. And allies who don't announce themselves too early. He slid a card across the table. No logo. Just a name and a number. Use it if they move first, he said. And they will. He walked away without another word. Renee sat there long after he was gone, heart pounding, mind racing. Because this wasn't just about pressure anymore. Someone was preparing to sacrifice her to save the system. And the worst part? They were already choosing the moment. Renee didn't go back to the hospital right away. She sat in her car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The cafe replayed in her head on a loop. The man's calm voice, the way he'd said uncertainty like it was a disease, the card now tucked inside her wallet like a quiet warning. Extortion. Fabrication. Interference. Crimes didn't need to be true to be dangerous. They just needed to sound plausible long enough to stick. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. I'm okay, she said before Elijah could speak. But we have a bigger problem. There was a pause. I'm listening. They're setting me up, Renee said. Not just scaring me. Positioning me. For what? For blame, she replied. If this breaks publicly, they want a villain. And I'm convenient. Silence on the other end stretched too long. Elijah? I'm here, he said slowly. And that tracks. Her grip tightened. You knew that was possible. Yes, he admitted. I just hoped we'd have more time. Renee closed her eyes. They don't plan to wait. She drove back to the hospital with that thought echoing in her chest. When she stepped into Claudette's room, something felt off immediately. The lights were dimmer. The machines quieter. Too quiet. Claudette lay still, eyes closed, breathing shallow but steady. A nurse stood near the monitor, adjusting something. Is she sleeping? Renee asked. The nurse turned, startled. Yes. We administered a mild sedative. Renee's heart jumped. Why? The nurse hesitated. She was experiencing anxiety. Renee stepped closer to the bed. She didn't ask for that. I followed the chart, the nurse said carefully. The order came through about 20 minutes ago. Renee felt cold spread through her chest. From who? The nurse glanced at the computer. Attending approval. Plus an external consult. Renee turned toward the screen. The name listed under consult made her breath catch. Keaton, Renee's phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. The nurse bent to pick it up, confused. Is something wrong? Renee forced herself to breathe. Yes, she said quietly. Something is very wrong. She stepped into the hallway and called Elijah back immediately. They sedated her, Renee said, voice shaking now. And Keaton authorized it. What? His voice sharpened. That's not her jurisdiction. They're isolating her, Renee said. Cutting me out. I'm calling legal, Elijah said. Right now. Don't leave her. As Renee returned to the bedside, Claudette stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering but not opening. Renee took her hand, fighting panic. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time there was no threat. Just a single sentence. You're running out of time to choose the quiet way. Renee stared at the message, then at her mother's still form. The realization hit her hard and fast. This was the escalation. Not pressure. Not fear. Control. And if Renee didn't act soon, they wouldn't just rewrite the story. They'd erase the witnesses. Renee stayed awake all night. Not because she wanted to. Because every time her eyes closed, she saw the monitor flatline in her imagination. She sat rigid in the chair beside her mother's bed, one hand wrapped around Claudette's fingers, the other resting on the edge of the mattress like an anchor. The sedative kept Claudette still. Too still. Every breath sounded borrowed. Around 3 in the morning, a doctor came in quietly, adjusting the 4 and checking the chart. Renee watched his every movement, memorizing his badge, his hands, the way he avoided her eyes. Is she supposed to be this unresponsive? Renee asked. He paused. She's stable. That's not an answer, Renee said. He looked at her then. Really looked. There's been a lot of attention on this case, he said carefully. Sometimes rest is encouraged. Renee felt her jaw tighten. Encouraged by who? He hesitated just long enough to answer without words. When he left, Renee stood and walked into the hallway, heart pounding. She called Elijah again, keeping her voice low. They're closing ranks, she said. Staff. Administration. Everyone's suddenly careful. I know, Elijah replied. His voice sounded tired, strained. I've been locked out of 2 internal systems I still technically have access to. Technically? Renee repeated. Yes, he said. Which means someone with higher authority reactivated dormant controls. Renee leaned against the wall. Your father? No, Elijah said quietly. This is someone who learned from him. Renee's stomach dropped. Elijah continued. I've also confirmed something else. Miss Keaton isn't acting alone. I figured, Renee said. She answers to a small oversight committee, Elijah said. Unofficial. No public records. But I recognized 2 names. Renee closed her eyes. Recognized how? Because one of them signed off on a settlement years ago, Elijah said. A settlement involving a child no one was supposed to know existed. Renee's breath caught. Another one like me? Yes, Elijah said. And that child didn't stay invisible. Renee felt a chill run through her. What happened to them? They were discredited, Elijah said. Publicly. Framed as unstable. Their claims buried under enough doubt that no one wanted to touch it. Renee swallowed. And now that's me. That's the plan, Elijah confirmed. Renee looked back into the room through the glass. Claudette lay there, unmoving, vulnerable in a way that made Renee's chest ache. They're using her to control me, Renee said. If I keep pushing, they let something happen. If I stop, they let her live. Elijah didn't respond right away. That's silence, Renee said softly. That's an answer. Elijah exhaled. I'm trying to find a third option. Renee straightened. I might already have one. She pulled the card from her wallet, running her thumb over the embossed name. She hadn't wanted to use it. Using it meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. What are you thinking? Elijah asked. There's someone who understands how these people move, Renee said. Someone who helped build what they're using. Elijah paused. Do you trust him? No, Renee said. But I trust his fear. She hung up before he could argue. The call connected on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, the man from the cafe said. They sedated my mother, Renee said, skipping pleasantries. Without consent. I know, he replied calmly. Renee's blood ran cold. How? Because that was the test, he said. To see if you'd freeze. Renee clenched her fist. What do you want? I want you to stop reacting, he said, and start anticipating. Then tell me how to protect her, Renee snapped. There was a pause. You can't, he said. Not in the way you want. Renee's voice dropped. Then why am I talking to you? Because there is a way to protect the truth, he said. And sometimes that means letting them think they've won. Renee felt something inside her harden. You want me to step back. I want you to appear to, he said. Publicly. Briefly. And in return? Renee asked. In return, he said, I help you expose the committee. Names. Proof. Not rumors. Renee closed her eyes. They'll retaliate. They already are, he replied. Renee looked at her mother through the glass again. If I do this, she said slowly, and anything happens to her, they won't touch her, he said. Not while you're compliant. The word made her sick. I need time, Renee said. You have hours, he replied. Not days. The line went dead. Renee slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold hospital floor, head in her hands. Compliance or confrontation? Silence or sacrifice? And as dawn crept through the hallway windows, Renee realized the cruelest part of all wasn't the choice. It was knowing that whichever path she chose, someone she loved would pay for it. Morning arrived without relief. The light through the hospital windows was pale and unforgiving, illuminating every crack in Renee's resolve. She stood at the sink in the small family restroom, splashing cold water on her face, trying to wash away the weight of the night. It didn't help. Nothing did. When she returned to Claudette's room, Elijah was there, seated stiffly in the corner chair. He looked like he hadn't slept either. You look like you decided something, he said quietly. Renee didn't sit. I spoke to the man again. Elijah's jaw tightened. And? He wants me to pause, Renee said. Publicly. He says if I step back, they'll ease off my mother. Elijah stood. And you believe him? No, Renee replied. But I believe he knows how this ends if I don't. Claudette stirred, eyes fluttering open for the first time since the sedative. Renee rushed to her side, relief crashing through her so hard it almost hurt. Hey, Renee whispered. I'm here. Claudette's gaze focused slowly. You look tired, she murmured. Renee smiled weakly. You should see the other guy. Claudette's hand tightened faintly around Renee's fingers. They did something, she said. Not a question. Renee hesitated. They tried. Claudette studied her daughter's face, seeing too much. What are they asking from you? Renee swallowed. Silence. Claudette closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. And what do you want? I want you safe, Renee said. I want the truth out. I want both. Claudette nodded slowly. Then listen to me. Renee leaned closer. I lived quietly so you wouldn't have to, Claudette said. I made myself small. I let doors close. I accepted limits. And they still followed us. Renee's throat tightened. Silence doesn't end this, Claudette continued. It only delays it. And delay always costs more. Elijah watched, saying nothing. They think my life is leverage, Claudette said softly. But it's not. It's yours. Renee shook her head. I can't gamble with you. Claudette's grip strengthened, surprising her. You're not gambling, she said. You're choosing not to be owned. Renee felt tears burn her eyes. They could make things worse. They already have, Claudette replied. Don't let them teach you fear disguised as caution. A knock sounded at the door. This time it wasn't a nurse. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, followed by a hospital administrator Renee recognized from earlier meetings. The man's smile was polite, distant. Miss Taylor, he said. I'm here on behalf of a private mediation group. Renee's body went cold. We understand you've been under stress, the man continued, and that certain communications may have caused unnecessary alarm. Elijah stepped forward. She has legal representation. The man nodded. Of course. This is informal. Renee laughed once. Everything you do is informal until it isn't. The man's smile thinned. We're offering a pause, he said. A cooling-off period. No statements. No interviews. In exchange, your mother's care continues without disruption. Claudette looked at Renee. They're negotiating, she said. Renee met the man's gaze. And if I refuse? He shrugged lightly. Hospitals are complicated systems. Elijah's voice was sharp. That sounds like a threat. The man didn't deny it. Renee felt something settle inside her. A clarity she hadn't expected. No, she said. I'm done pausing. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. Miss Taylor? No, Renee repeated. You don't get silence anymore. The man studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Very well. He turned and left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. Elijah exhaled. That was it, he said. You just crossed the line. Renee nodded. I know. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Unknown number. You just chose exposure. Renee looked at her mother, who was watching her with calm, unflinching eyes. Yes, Renee whispered. I did. And as alarms beeped steadily and footsteps echoed down the hallway, Renee understood something with terrifying certainty. They weren't going to protect her anymore. They were going to try to end this. Fast. The fallout came faster than Renee expected. By noon, her name was everywhere. Not in headlines yet, but in the quiet, dangerous places first. Emails that stopped replying. Calls that went straight to voicemail. Meetings that were suddenly postponed indefinitely. The kind of silence that wasn't empty at all, but crowded with intent. Elijah paced the narrow hospital corridor, phone pressed to his ear. No, that's not a coincidence, he said sharply. 3 sponsors don't pull out within an hour unless someone made a call. Renee sat beside her mother's bed, holding Claudette's hand, her thumb tracing slow circles over fragile skin. She listened, but her focus stayed on the rise and fall of Claudette's chest. Every breath felt borrowed. Let them go, Renee said quietly when Elijah hung up. You stopped pacing. These were your biggest backers. I know, she replied. That's why they're scared. Claudette smiled faintly. Power hates daylight, she murmured. Renee leaned down. You should be resting. I am, Claudette said. I'm resting in truth. A nurse entered then, her smile polite but strained. She checked the monitors a little too carefully. Is something wrong? Renee asked. No, the nurse said quickly. Just routine. But when she left, Renee noticed the door down the hall close, then reopen. A man she didn't recognize stood there, pretending to scroll on his phone. He looked up once. Long enough to be seen. They're watching, Elijah said under his breath. Renee nodded. Good. That afternoon, Renee recorded a short video on her phone. No makeup. No script. Just her voice, steady but raw. My name is Renee Taylor, she said into the camera. And if anything happens to me or my family, you'll know why. Elijah watched, concern etched deep into his face. Once this is out, there's no pulling it back. I know, she said. That's the point. She didn't post it. Not yet. She saved it, backed it up, sent copies to people she trusted. Journalists, friends, strangers who believed in accountability more than comfort. By evening, the hospital room felt smaller. The air heavier. Claudette's condition dipped suddenly. Alarms chirped. Nurses rushed in. Doctors followed. Renee was gently pushed back as hands moved quickly, efficiently. What's happening? Renee asked, panic clawing up her chest. We're stabilizing her, a doctor said. Please wait outside. The door closed. Renee stood frozen, staring at the wood grain, counting seconds she couldn't afford to lose. Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder. This isn't your fault. Renee shook her head. They said hospitals are complicated systems. Minutes stretched. Each one felt like a test. Finally, the door opened. She's stable, the doctor said. But this can't keep happening. Stress is dangerous for her. Renee nodded numbly. I understand. As the doctor walked away, Renee's phone vibrated again. Unknown number. This time, no words. Just a photo. Her childhood home. Lights off. Front door slightly open. Renee's breath caught. Elijah saw her face. What is it? They're done warning me, Renee said softly. They're moving. She looked back at the hospital room, at her mother lying there, fragile but unbroken. Renee straightened her shoulders. Then so am I. Because the next move wouldn't be quiet. It would be public. The courtroom was quieter than Renee expected. Not silent. Just restrained. Like a room full of people holding their breath, afraid that any sound might tip something fragile over the edge. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust in the air. Renee sat at the long wooden table, hands folded, her posture calm but alert. Across from her, men in tailored suits whispered to their attorneys, their confidence frayed at the edges. These were the same people who once moved markets with a phone call. Today they avoided her eyes. Elijah leaned close. Once this starts, there's no stopping it. Renee nodded. It already started a long time ago. When the judge entered, the room rose as one. Renee felt the weight of years pressed down on her shoulders. The nights cleaning floors until her knees ached. The humiliation of asking for a loan that felt like begging. The fear when the threats came. The hospital room. Her mother's shallow breathing. Claudette sat behind her now, wrapped in a soft cardigan, thinner but steady. She met Renee's eyes and gave a small nod. Pride. Relief. Something close to peace. The prosecutor began calmly, methodically. Documents appeared on screens. Bank records. Shell companies. Recorded calls. Emails that were never meant to see daylight. Renee watched faces change as truth unfolded in plain language. There was no dramatic shouting. No sudden confessions. Just facts stacking up, one after another, impossible to ignore. Then it was her turn. Renee stood. Her legs trembled for half a second, then steadied. She spoke into the microphone without raising her voice. "I didn't come here as a victim," she said. "I came here as a witness." She told them about the loan. About the quiet condition attached to it. About what she'd overheard while cleaning offices late at night. Names she wasn't supposed to know. Numbers that didn't make sense until they did. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't plead. She simply told the truth. When the defense tried to paint her as resentful, opportunistic, emotional, Renee didn't flinch. "I scrubbed your floors," she said evenly. "I listened because no one thought I mattered enough to notice." A ripple moved through the room. The judge called for a recess. In the hallway, reporters gathered, voices overlapping, cameras flashing. Renee shielded her eyes, disoriented by the sudden noise. One reporter called out, "Do you think this will change anything?" Renee stopped walking. She turned back slowly. "Change doesn't happen all at once," she said. "But it does start somewhere." The trial lasted weeks. Some defendants settled quietly. Others fought until the end. Charges were filed. Careers ended. A few men who once felt untouchable left the courthouse in silence, their faces pale, their futures uncertain. Renee didn't celebrate. She went home. Not to the old house with the broken steps. Not to the billionaire's world either. She moved into a modest place with sunlight in the mornings and neighbors who nodded hello without knowing her name from the news. Claudette's health improved slowly. There were setbacks. Arguments about diet. Laughter during bad TV shows. Life stitched back together in imperfect seams. One afternoon, Renee found the envelope she kept all this time. The one with the loan agreement. She stared at it for a long moment, then tore it in half. Then quarters. Then scraps. She opened the window and let the pieces fall into the trash. Months later, Renee stood in front of a small group at a community center. Janitors. Caregivers. People whose labor kept everything running while no one looked. "I don't have all the answers," she told them. "But I know this. Your voice matters. Even when the world acts like it doesn't." Afterward, a young woman approached her, eyes bright, hands shaking. "I saw your story online," she said. "It made me feel less invisible." Renee smiled. Then it was worth it. That night, Renee sat on her couch, the city humming outside. She thought about how many stories like hers never reached a courtroom. How many were still unfolding in silence. If you've been listening this far, maybe it's because something here felt familiar. Maybe you've stood in rooms where you felt small. Maybe you've carried more than anyone knew. Stories like this don't end when the screen goes dark. They continue in choices, in courage, in speaking up when it's easier not to. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about truth, resilience, and the quiet power of ordinary people, make sure you're subscribed. Share your thoughts. Tell us where you're watching from. Because sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes everything.